Sure, those of you who are watching probably have a pet of some kind. If you don't, maybe you want one. If you don't want one, then that's totally all right. But many people probably have pets that are watching this, whether it's a cat or a dog. And both cats and dogs are awesome. They're fun to take care of, but they're also a lot of work, right? Typically, you have to do a lot of things with the dog, take them on a walk, pick up their poop, all that jazz. Cats, you really don't have to do much. You can leave them alone for like 3 days and they're fine, right? But regardless of whether or not your pet plays tricks or does awesome things, it does take work to have a pet. Now, I'm going to go ahead and ask you this question. How many guys have ever spent a lot of time around sheep? Most likely, unless you're a farmer or something, a sheep herder, you probably haven't spent a lot of time around sheep. But honestly, sheep are one of the dumbest animals around, okay? Sheep are not exactly the brightest bunch there is. And what I want you to go ahead and do is watch this little video about sheep, all right?
We're getting there. We're getting there. Well, that's better. That's better. That's better. That's more like it now.
Stand there.
I'm sure some of them are pong, but...
Right, I'm aiming for that snake over there then, yeah? Stay there. That's good.
There are two in front of you and move those to the right.
Let's go on there. This one here.
Everybody stop there. Don't move. Start on the next page. Yes, that's better. That's good. That's good. Looking good.
Let's get away.
That's it.
All right, that's kind of a cool video. I liked the part where you can see the sheep light up and they're going back and forth, and it looks like Pong. I don't even know if you know what that is. Old time game. But when you look at this idea of sheep, okay, we're going to kind of dive into this idea of Jesus being the good shepherd, and we're going to dive into a really famous psalm this morning. One that you've probably actually heard. We're going to be looking at the Psalms briefly, one of the largest books in the Bible. But we're going to look at this little chapter, Psalm 23. Okay, and Psalm is basically a book of worship songs for God's people. Each psalm serves a different purpose, such as personal or maybe communal lament, a hymn, a song, or a declaration. And many of these were set to music. In fact, actually, a lot of the songs that we sing on a regular basis, worship songs, are considered psalms from the Bible. All right, so we're going to look at this. David, actually, we have talked about David. We talked about David last week. A lot of different authors wrote psalms, but a lot of them were written by David. And this one specifically was written by David, Psalm 23. And last week, we talked about David. In fact, actually, the last couple weeks we've talked about David. And if you remember correctly, last week we talked about David as being a man of God who fell really hard. For instance, he slept with Bathsheba and committed adultery, committed murder, and was found out for it. And there was a punishment, and that would be his son would end up dying. All right, so there's a lot of things to David. Okay, David was anointed king at a young age, killed Goliath, did a lot of awesome things to the Philistines, and was a war hero, but he also made some mistakes. And so that's what we talked about last week. And Psalm 23 is a psalm that David wrote talking about how God is his shepherd. God is his comforter. All right, so that's what we're going to go through today. As we've been going through the entirety of the Bible, we've gone through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and we're kind of in that right now, but we're taking a little breather and going to the Psalms real quick to discuss a psalm that David wrote. But as we look at this, you've seen the story of the Bible unfold. You've seen how God's people have been chosen by him through Abraham and all of these descendants coming together, and how they disobey God, but then God comes back and gives them mercy, and it's a never-ending cycle here. What I want you to go ahead and do is read Psalm 23 real quick and answer these questions. All right, if you haven't grown up in the church where you heard Psalm 23 all the time, maybe this was the first time that you heard Psalm 23 or read Psalm 23. Perhaps you wonder if you've fallen asleep and you've woken up at somebody's funeral. If you're more familiar with this psalm, maybe you envision mountain vistas, spectacular sunsets, and lazy meadows beside a babbling brook. Maybe that's kind of your vision here with what's going on. Gentle music might play in the background of your imagination. Okay, it's a very soothing chapter. But by the end of our lesson today, I hope that you see a little bit more. So real quick, I want you to go ahead and read 1 Samuel 16, 6 through 13. Okay, so as we talked about previously, okay, Samuel was a prophet of God. He was told by God to select a new king for Israel, and he was told to go to a man named Jesse, and God would show Samuel the new king from Jesse's sons. So what was David doing when God's prophet came to select him as king? Well, he was watching his sheep. He was shepherding, right? But I want you to go ahead and put yourself in David's shoes, okay? He's about 13 to 15 years old, and I want you to go ahead and let your imagination run with this for a minute. What was he thinking when the prophet of God anointed his head with oil to signify that he would be king? Well, honestly, some possible answers might include fear, excitement, disbelief. He might wonder, who's watching my sheep over there? Okay, I've got this thing going on, but who's watching my sheep? But some things that might have been going on in his brothers' heads were, what? Why not me? Why him? Okay? They may have felt a little bit of jealousy. They may have felt a little admiration and joy for their brother. Probably not, though. Okay? They were probably really jealous of what was going on. So as David is doing this, obviously he's not watching his sheep, but one of his main jobs was being a shepherd. So what do you think it was like to be a shepherd back then? Now, shepherds are totally responsible for something fragile and valuable, sheep, because they're dealing with animals that are helpless, defenseless, armless, and fairly stupid. So shepherding is probably pretty lonely thing to do. Shepherds are constantly on the lookout for danger. So that's what David was doing when he was anointed king. That's who he was before all of this had started. So real quick, I want to go back to Psalms, and I want you to go ahead and read Psalm 23, 1 through 4 real quick and answer these questions. Okay, some phrases that David uses here are fields of green grass, quiet waters, the right paths, rod, staff. A lot of those can represent quite a few things. I mean, when you think of fields of grass, you might think of peace, rest, maybe food. If you think of quiet waters, you might think of just kind of the calmness of things. You think of the right paths, you might think of guiding in the midst of uncertainty, leadership. When you think of rod, you might think of a club to beat off predators, protection, okay, which is what shepherds would do to protect their sheep, would be to use a rod to bat any enemies or anything like that. And a staff would be a walking stick used to gently guide the sheep to where the shepherd wanted the sheep to go. So real quick, as we think of God, this is kind of a symbol of God being our shepherd. There's probably a lot of things that God has done for you and your family. I hope that maybe God has provided for you, provided peace, provided protection, provided shelter, provided a family. So maybe those are some things that God has provided for your family. David was so successful at everything Saul had asked him to do that Saul put David in charge of the army. And unfortunately, David was so successful in battle and well-liked by people that Saul became angry and jealous. Okay, so as we get to the whole idea behind David, we do see that as David was anointed in the next king of Israel, Saul became envious and jealous. And you see throughout 1 Samuel, at the end of it, Saul wants to kill David. Saul wants to rid the world of David. And David, in a lot of ways, tries to escape, and he lives like a fugitive on the run. And just all in all, Saul is trying to look to kill him. So let me ask you this. What do you think it would be like to be living on the run? Well, for David, it's probably obvious that he would feel a little paranoia, maybe some fear, and would have had a little food, shelter, clean water, yeah, but there's probably a lot of paranoia having to look back wondering, where's Saul, where's Saul, where's Saul? So there's a lot of things going on in this chapter. Real quick, we want to go back to Psalm 23, and I want you to read this again. This time, when you read Psalm 23, what I want you to go ahead and do is try to imagine that you are on the run from somebody trying to get to you. All right, this time, I think Psalms might have a different perspective for you to be going through. Some emotions that you might be hearing at this time if you're on the run are, you have everything you need. We look at the phrases, lie down in the fields of green grass and the darkest valley. And honestly, you might be thinking, God's giving you peace in this time to rest from the chase that's going on. In the darkest valley, you might be wondering who is hiding in the shadows and around the corner. So you're paranoid, right? There's a lot of evil behind you, and you're just wondering where it is. And so after King Saul died, David became the next king in Judah, one of the 12 parts of the country. Now, the other 11 parts were united against David with one of Saul's sons as their king. And there was a violent civil war, and it was fierce and angry, and people would be battling their relatives and neighbors. And after about 7 years, Saul, his son, was killed, and the whole country was united with David as their king. So what do you think it would have been like for David to finally become the king after so many years of struggle? Well, he probably would have felt a sense of relief here. It would have taken a lot of faith to believe what God had promised 15 years ago, but at this point, he would have felt a lot of relief that this has actually happened. As you can see, this one song can bring a number of things to our minds and hearts depending on what's going on in our lives. See, that's the beauty of Psalms. They're expressions of human emotions as real life is going on around us. Now, sometimes they're full of thankfulness and praise, and other times we see frustration, worry, and even anger in the midst of these Psalms. But they always point us back to God and His rule over our lives and His love for us. Now, in the midst of the chaos of life, these anchor us to the Lord as our true foundation. These Psalms do that. And as we dive into the next section, we're going to see how Jesus fits into this role of being our shepherd. Now, as you read the Psalms, always be on the lookout for how Jesus is the true fulfillment of what's being talked about. So we're going to look at a passage that we've looked at before, John chapter 10, and also Jeremiah. And in John, okay, the crowd that Jesus was talking to would have been really familiar with shepherds and sheep, and they would know what makes a good shepherd versus a bad one. And they would have also been familiar with Psalm 23, which is also a passage that we just read. And their concept and thinking of the Lord as their shepherd would have been ingrained in their minds. So we see Jesus is going to make some bold claims here in this passage that they will really kind of perk up. Okay, they will be able to hear what's going on and know, hey, this is referencing Psalm 23. This is a big deal. All right, so what I want you to go ahead and do is read John 10, 11 through 15, and Jeremiah 23, 1 through 4, and answer these questions. All right? Okay, as we see the glaring differences between these two passages, all right? Jeremiah describes leaders that lead their people astray and don't care about them. Well, in John, Jesus says he's a good shepherd that truly cares for his people and even lays down his life for his sheep. And as we see in John chapter 10, verse 11, he talks about how he is the I am the good shepherd, all right? And as we see what's so significant about that, you have to realize what I am means. See, remember in Exodus chapter 3, we talked about the calling of Moses in the burning bush, and God right there calls himself the great I am. And so when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, he is specifically talking about I am God. I am the great I am. I am Yahweh. All right, so Jesus is drawing attention to the fact that he is God and using I am as a claim to his divinity. So if Jesus begins this passage with the claim to his divinity and goes on to say that he is the good shepherd, the connection here with Psalm 23 is he's letting us know that he is the shepherd that David described in Psalm 23. He's the good shepherd that leads his people in the ways that we have already discussed. But he adds in there that he's willing to die for his people. So we go even further and we see the death on the cross that Jesus died, that we celebrated on Easter. And that's a really, really vital role that Jesus plays here for dying for his sheep, dying for you and I. It's a connection that Psalm 23 you can make here. So we've looked at two important sections of the Bible. And in Psalm 23, we read a lot about the Lord's character and how he cares for his people. And in John 10, we read about Jesus making the claim that he is God and that he is the true shepherd. He's even willing to die for his sheep. That's this morning's lesson. I hope that it encouraged you. What I'm going to go ahead and do is lead us in a word of prayer, have one or two announcements, and we'll be dismissed. God, we are so thankful for you and who you are in our life. We thank you that you are our good shepherd. I pray this morning that you will be with these students and these parents that are watching this morning. Just be with them as they continue on with their week and as we continue to see how this coronavirus is affecting our economy and our world and our way of thinking. Just allow us to have peace, knowing that you are in control, God. In your precious and holy name we pray. Amen. All right, guys, real quick. Tomorrow, May 11th, all right, if you're interested, at 6 p.m., we're going to be on Zoom for a game night, okay? So if you would love to be a part of that, that's happening at 6 o'clock. Also, Wednesday nights, as we've discussed, 6 o'clock YouTube Live, and then at 6:45, we go to Zoom. We are not, I don't know if you haven't heard, okay, we are not going to be opening up the green room till June. We've decided that it was just in the best interests of everybody involved in keeping everybody safe. So we'll continue to be online throughout the rest of May. I will let you go. I hope you guys are doing well. Have a great week.